She arrived at the airport early because she did not want to make any mistake. She held her ticket carefully in her hand, checking it again and again even though she already knew everything was correct. She was an ordinary woman, dressed in simple clothes, with a small handbag and a calm face. She did not look like someone who would travel first class. But she had saved for months for this trip. It was a gift to herself, something she had never experienced before. She walked through the airport, slowly looking around with wide eyes. The marble floors shined, people moved fast, announcements echoed, and for a moment she felt proud of herself for coming here alone. She stood in the first-class line, nervous but smiling softly. She tried to look confident even though her heart beat fast. The people behind her looked richer, wearing expensive clothes, carrying designer luggage. Some of them stared at her as if she was lost, but she tried to ignore it. She reminded herself that her ticket was real, and she had every right to be there. The staff at the counter glanced at her and then at her ticket. Their expression changed immediately. One of them raised an eyebrow, another whispered to a coworker. The woman did not understand why they were reacting like that. She thought maybe it was normal procedure. She stood quietly and waited. She did not want to cause trouble. She believed kindness always helped. The airport around her buzzed with energy. Suitcases rolled across the floor. Families hugged each other goodbye. Children laughed. Businessmen rushed with phones pressed to their ears. But she stood still, trying not to feel out of place. She remembered her husband telling her not to worry. He said everything was taken care of. He had booked the ticket himself. He wanted her to enjoy comfort, luxury, and peace. What she did not mention to anyone was that her husband was extremely wealthy, a billionaire who liked living a quiet and simple life. He never showed off his money. He wore normal clothes, drove a modest car, and never acted like someone powerful. The woman was the same, humble and gentle. They lived simply even though they could live like royalty. That was why nobody at the airport could guess who she was. She stepped forward when it was her turn. Her voice was soft as she greeted the staff. She handed over her passport and ticket with a polite smile. She expected a smile back, but instead she received a cold look. The worker looked at her from head to toe as if examining a stranger who did not belong there. The woman felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment, but she stayed calm. She reminded herself to breathe and stay polite. The worker tapped on the computer and frowned. Then she asked loudly if the woman was sure the ticket was hers. The people around them turned to look. The woman nodded gently and explained that yes, it was her ticket. She paid for it, or rather, her husband did, but she did not say that part because she never wanted to sound like she was showing off. The worker shook her head and said something was wrong. She asked the woman to step aside. The woman felt her stomach twist. Fear and confusion mixed in her chest. She wondered if she had done something wrong. Maybe she stood in the wrong line. Maybe she misunderstood something. She stepped aside quietly, holding her handbag tightly. People stared as if she was suspicious. She heard whispers. She wished her husband was with her, but he was already in another city waiting for her arrival. She tried to stay strong, telling herself everything would be fine. She checked her ticket again, reading every detail. It clearly said first class in bold letters. Her seat number was written. Her name was printed correctly. Everything matched. Still she waited, feeling smaller and smaller with every passing second. A child nearby smiled at her, and she smiled back faintly. That small kindness helped her breathe again. She remembered why she wanted this trip. She wanted to surprise her husband. She wanted to prove she could travel alone. She wanted to feel brave, independent, and capable. The staff continued to whisper and look at her. One of them pointed in her direction and laughed quietly behind a hand. The woman pretended not to notice, but her heart hurt. She wondered why simple clothes made her look unworthy. She wondered why people judged so fast. She wondered why kindness was so rare. Still, she stood there patiently, believing that sooner or later the misunderstanding would be cleared. She never imagined that this moment, this humiliation, this unfair treatment would soon shake the entire airport. She never imagined that the people laughing at her would soon lose their jobs. She never imagined that a single phone call would change everything. For now, she simply stood there, alone, quiet, waiting for someone to treat her with the respect she already deserved. When the woman was finally called back to the counter, she walked forward with hope, thinking the issue was fixed. But the employee stood stiff, arms crossed and eyes sharp. The staff member spoke in a loud voice, loud enough for others to hear, and told her she did not belong in the first-class boarding area. The woman tried to explain again, her voice gentle, saying the ticket was correct and she had every right to board. But the employee waved a hand dismissively as if brushing away a problem. People nearby began to look more openly, some with annoyance, some with curiosity, and some with judgment. The worker leaned closer and told her that the first-class line was only for passengers who paid for their seats, not for people trying to sneak in. The woman felt a sting inside her chest. She had never been spoken to like that. She repeated calmly that the ticket was hers, that her name was printed clearly on it, but the worker rolled her eyes and said the ticket looked Suspicious, a supervisor was called, a tall man with a strict face and a clipped tone. He did not greet her, did not smile, did not offer kindness. He only asked for the ticket and stared at it as if it smelled bad. He asked her if she understood how serious ticket fraud was. The woman felt her throat tighten. She shook her head and explained again, but he barely listened. He said people like her tried tricks all the time. He said she should be honest and admit she could not afford first class. The words hit her like cold water. Passengers around her reacted. Some smirked, some whispered. A few looked uncomfortable but said nothing. The woman felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, but she stood her ground. Her hands shook but her voice stayed soft. She asked them to verify the booking properly. The supervisor pretended to check but clearly did not care. He raised his voice and told her she must move away from the gate or security would be called. The woman gasped. Softly, she could not understand how quickly she became an enemy in their eyes. She belonged there, yet they acted like she was trespassing. A family nearby pulled their children closer as if she was dangerous. 2 business travelers laughed under their breath. A group of young women looked her up and down with disgust. The woman tried once more to explain, but the supervisor lifted his hand to silence her. He said first class was for people who looked like they belonged, not for ordinary people trying to pretend. The words echoed in her ears. Ordinary people, pretend, not belong. The woman felt something inside her crack, not with anger but with sadness. All she ever wanted was respect. She stepped back a little, trembling. She thought of her husband, his kindness, his gentle voice telling her she deserved comfort. He never treated her like she was less, never judged her clothes, never made her feel small. She wished she could hear his voice now. The supervisor signaled security. 2 guards began walking toward her. The woman felt her heart race. She was not a criminal. She was not wrong. Yet the world around her acted as if she was. She took a slow breath and reached for her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She dialed her husband, hoping he would answer. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was warm, steady, strong. The woman tried to speak but her voice cracked. She told him what happened, how they refused to believe her, how they said she did not belong. Her husband did not raise his voice, did not panic, did not hesitate. He asked to speak to the supervisor. The woman handed the phone to him. The supervisor smirked, thinking it was a joke, thinking this was some desperate attempt. He pressed the phone to his ear lazily, expecting nothing, but the moment he heard the voice on the other end, his expression changed, his eyebrows lifted, his back straightened, his confidence cracked. The husband spoke calmly, but his words carried weight, power, authority. The supervisor swallowed and stepped away from the counter, his face turning pale. The guards paused, uncertain. The employees glanced at each other nervously. The woman watched all of it, confusion mixing with curiosity. She did not know what her husband said, but she saw fear settle into the staff like a cold wind. The supervisor hurried back and returned the phone with shaking hands. His voice suddenly polite, his tone suddenly respectful. He asked her to wait just one moment. His eyes avoided hers. Something had shifted, something big. The woman stood silently, unaware that the next few minutes would change everything in the airport, unaware that her husband was not just wealthy, but a major shareholder in the airline itself, unaware that the people who humiliated her were moments away from losing everything. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the woman felt the faint spark of power return to her chest, not because she wanted revenge, but because dignity was finally coming back to her, inch by inch, word by word, breath by breath. The woman stood there, still unsure of what was happening. The sudden change in behavior from the staff felt strange, almost unreal. A moment ago they were treating her like she was nothing, and now they whispered among themselves with nervous eyes. The supervisor kept glancing at her as if waiting for something. The employees who had mocked her earlier tried to look busy, pretending they had never laughed, never judged, never accused, but the memory of their words still sat heavy in her chest. She held her handbag a little tighter, feeling a mix of fear and confusion. She wondered what her husband said on the phone. She wondered why the supervisor looked frightened. She wondered why the guards who were ready to remove her now stood frozen, unsure of their next move. The woman wanted to ask what was happening, but she stayed silent. She was a gentle person who never liked conflict, never liked raising her voice, never liked drawing attention, but attention was now on her. Passengers who had judged her earlier watched with curiosity. Some were confused, some annoyed, and some curious about why the staff suddenly changed their tone. The woman heard the supervisor make a rushed phone call. His voice was low, careful, almost shaking. Then he hung up and told another employee to get the airport manager immediately. The employee ran, not walked, ran. The woman blinked in surprise. She had never seen staff move that fast. The airport manager arrived minutes later, walking quickly. Adjusting his tie, he looked around and then spoke to the supervisor in a tense whisper. The woman could not hear the words, but she could see their expressions, alarmed, urgent, worried. The manager approached her with a forced smile, the kind someone uses when they are scared of making a mistake. He asked her if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if someone had treated her poorly. The woman almost laughed at the sudden kindness, but she only nodded softly, saying she just wanted to board her flight. The manager assured her that everything would be handled, that there must have been a misunderstanding, that she would be boarding soon, but the truth was far bigger than that. The woman still did not know that her husband was not only a billionaire, but also the quiet owner of one of the largest investment groups tied directly to the airline. When he made a call, people listened. When he spoke, careers trembled. And right now, airport leadership was scrambling to fix what they thought was a disaster. The supervisor was asked to step aside. He looked pale, his hands shook. The employees who mocked her earlier stood frozen, their confidence gone. The woman watched all of it quietly, still not fully understanding. She felt a strange mix of emotions. A part of her felt relieved, another part felt overwhelmed, and a small part felt a rising sense of justice. Passengers began whispering again, but this time the whispers were different. Who is she? Why are the staff panicking? Why did everything change so fast? The woman looked down at her simple clothes, her inexpensive shoes, her plain handbag. She did not look powerful, she did not look wealthy, and perhaps that was why this moment carried so much weight. One of the employees approached her, the same one who had rolled her eyes earlier. Her voice shook as she apologized. The woman listened politely, but her heart still hurt. Apologies felt shallow when they came only after fear, not after kindness. The airport manager asked her to follow him to a private lounge while the matter was sorted. She hesitated, not wanting to cause trouble, but he insisted. His smile was tight, strained, desperate. She walked through the airport with him, and suddenly the same people who judged her earlier moved out of her way. Some lowered their eyes, some tried to smile politely, some looked guilty. The woman felt a strange silence inside her. She did not feel triumphant, she did not feel superior, she only felt tired. The private lounge was luxurious, soft chairs, warm lighting, quiet air, a far cry from the humiliation she endured earlier. The manager offered her refreshments, but she only asked for water. She sat down slowly, letting her body relax for the first time since the confrontation started. She wondered if she should call her husband again, but she decided to wait. She trusted him, trusted his calm power, trusted his quiet strength. Outside the lounge, chaos continued. The supervisor was questioned by higher officials. The staff were pulled aside one by one. Some tried to defend themselves, some blamed each other, some said they did nothing wrong, but the truth was clear. They judged her based on appearance, and that judgment was now costing them everything. The woman sat quietly, unaware of every detail, unaware that her name was now being spoken in every office of the airport, unaware that security footage was being reviewed, unaware that reports were being written. She only knew one thing: she had been treated unfairly, and now the world was shifting because of it. She took a slow breath and closed her eyes, hoping the rest of the journey would be peaceful. But deep inside she sensed something. This was only the beginning. The real storm was still coming, and the airport had no idea how strong it would be. She sat in the quiet lounge, the glass of water trembling slightly in her hand because her fingers still shook from the stress. The silence felt strange after all the noise, judgment, and humiliation she faced outside. She tried to calm her breathing, reminding herself she had done nothing wrong, reminding herself she belonged here, reminding herself that her ticket was real. But even in comfort, her heart felt heavy. She kept replaying the rude words in her mind, the laughter, the disbelief, the way they looked at her like she was pretending to be someone she was not. She blinked back the sting in her eyes and looked toward the door, wondering what was happening outside, wondering why the manager kept checking his phone, wondering why the staff avoided eye contact whenever they passed the lounge window. After a few minutes, the manager returned and asked if she needed anything. His voice was careful, almost overly polite. He said the situation was being handled. She nodded gently. Still confused, still unsure whether to feel relieved or worried, she decided it was time to call her husband again, not because she wanted to complain, but because she wanted comfort. She needed to hear his voice, she needed to feel safe. She dialed his number, and he answered immediately. His voice was calm, warm, and steady. He asked if she was all right, if anyone had touched her, if she was frightened. She assured him she was safe now, but she told him how they accused her, how they insulted her, how they threatened her with security. Her husband listened without interrupting, but she could hear the shift in his breathing, a quiet anger beneath the calm. He told her gently to give the phone to whoever was in charge. She hesitated, but then handed it to the airport manager. The manager took the phone with a respectful nod, but when he placed it to his ear, his face changed completely. His eyes widened, his shoulders stiffened, and his throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He said yes, sir, several times, his voice getting smaller and smaller. The woman watched him, confused, wondering what her husband could possibly be saying to cause such a reaction. After a moment, the manager handed the phone back with shaky hands and said someone higher was on the way. She lifted the phone to her ear again, and her husband told her softly not to worry. He said everything would be corrected. He said people who treated her poorly would face consequences. He said respect was not optional. Not when it came to her. His words made her chest warm. She was not used to anyone defending her so fiercely. She whispered a thank you, and he told her he loved her. She ended the call and sat quietly, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Outside the lounge, things escalated quickly. The regional director of the airline arrived at the airport in person. He demanded reports, demanded names, demanded an explanation for the humiliation of the wife of a primary investor. Employees whispered in panic. Some cried, some tried to shift blame, some began to realize their jobs were slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, the woman sat unaware of most of it. All she knew was that something powerful had been set in motion. The manager returned again, sweat on his forehead. He apologized repeatedly, bowing his head, saying there had been a terrible mistake, saying she would be escorted personally to the aircraft, saying her comfort was now their priority. The woman listened politely, but inside, she still felt the sting of the earlier insults. Apologies felt too easy, too late, too thin. She asked in a quiet voice why she had been treated that way, why her ticket was not believed, why her appearance made them assume she was lying. The manager's face turned red and he could not answer, because the truth was simple and ugly. They thought she was not worthy of first class because she looked ordinary, because she did not sparkle with wealth, because she did not show off, because she did not look like someone powerful. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the lounge door. 3 senior officials entered, their faces stiff with fear and forced politeness. They apologized one by one, voices trembling, hands wringing. They said the staff involved were being removed from duty immediately. They said the airline would issue written apologies. They said compensation would be provided. The woman sat silently, overwhelmed, surprised, unsure how to respond. She never wanted anyone fired. She never wanted chaos. She only wanted respect. She only wanted fairness. She only wanted dignity. But now the situation had grown much larger than her emotions. This was no longer just about a ticket or a boarding line. This was about judgment, power, and consequences. And deep inside, the woman realized something important. The world judged what it could see, but her husband saw what others could not. And that was why everything was changing. The officials asked if she was ready to board soon. But before she stood, she took a slow breath, knowing that the moment she stepped out of that lounge, the entire airport would never forget her. And the real shift was only just beginning. The moment she stepped out of the lounge, everything felt different. The same hallway that once made her feel small now felt wider, quieter, and strangely respectful. Staff members stood straighter when she passed. Some lowered their heads, others stepped aside quickly, a few whispered nervously, but no one looked at her with the same judgment as before. The airport manager walked beside her, but he no longer looked confident. His hands were clasped tightly, and every few seconds he checked his phone as if waiting for further orders. The woman walked slowly, still unsure how the situation had grown so serious. She kept replaying her husband's calm voice in her head. He had not shouted, had not threatened, had not tried to sound powerful. And yet his words traveled through the entire airport like a storm wind. They reached the boarding gate again, but it looked nothing like before. The employees who had mocked her earlier were gone. Their stations empty, badges removed. Some passengers who witnessed the earlier humiliation looked confused, wondering why the atmosphere had changed so suddenly. A new team of staff stood at the counter now, and the moment they saw her approaching, they straightened like soldiers. The team leader smiled warmly, but his eyes showed nervousness. He welcomed her respectfully and apologized for the treatment she endured. The woman listened silently, still feeling the old sting beneath the surface. The apology was better than before, but she still remembered being humiliated in front of strangers. She handed over her ticket gently, and this time it was scanned without hesitation. The system confirmed it immediately. The screen flashed first class clearly. Passengers nearby saw it and gasped softly. Some who once smirked now looked embarrassed. One woman who earlier whispered that she must be lying now looked at her shoes, ashamed. The woman felt a strange shift inside her. Not pride, not revenge, but a sense of balance returning. She was given her boarding pass holder with both hands as if she were royalty. The new staff asked if they could escort her personally to the aircraft. She nodded politely, still overwhelmed. 2 attendants walked ahead, opening space for her path, and the airport suddenly felt like a different world. But the real shock came next. Just as she approached the jet bridge, a group of high-ranking airline officials arrived, rushing breathlessly. They asked her to pause for a moment because someone extremely important was on the way. She did not understand who could be more important than the staff already present, but she waited quietly, Then the atmosphere changed again, security personnel stood straighter, radios buzzed, heads turned toward the entrance of the terminal, and a man in a dark suit entered, walking quickly with urgency in his steps. He was not loud, not dramatic, but the airport reacted to him like he carried authority deeper than rank. He stopped in front of her and introduced himself with a respectful bow. He said he was the airline's regional president. He explained that her husband was not only a major investor, but someone whose influence shaped the company's future. He said that any disrespect toward her was unacceptable at the highest level. The woman felt her breath catch. She never imagined her husband held such quiet power. She never imagined the phone call she made with shaking hands had reached the highest levels of corporate authority. The president asked if she wished to file a formal complaint. The woman hesitated. She thought about the workers who insulted her. She thought about how quickly they judged. She thought about their laughter. But she also thought about losing a job, losing income, losing stability. She shook her head softly, saying she did not want to ruin anyone's life. She only wanted respect. The president looked surprised, then impressed. He said her grace would be noted, but consequences were already in motion. The woman was escorted onto the aircraft. The first-class cabin was quiet, spacious, soft with warm lighting and gentle music. The flight attendants greeted her like an honored guest. They helped her with her bag, offered her a warm towel, and gave her a drink before she even sat down. Passengers nearby watched curiously, wondering who she was. One man asked if she was a diplomat. Another thought she was royalty. Some whispered theories, but no one dared to judge her again. She sat down slowly, letting herself sink into the comfortable seat. Her heart still carried the bruises of humiliation, but now something else settled beside it, a sense of worth, a sense of dignity, a sense of being seen. As the cabin door closed, she looked out the window and took a deep breath. She had survived humiliation, witnessed power, and discovered how quickly the world could flip when truth was revealed. But she did not know that the story was spreading beyond the airport, that news was traveling fast, that people online were already discussing the event. She did not know the staff who treated her poorly were facing investigations. She did not know the airline board was meeting urgently. She only knew one thing for sure: the world had judged her too quickly, and now the world was learning a lesson it would not forget, and the flight had only just begun. The plane began to move slowly across the runway, and the woman felt the gentle vibration beneath her seat. The flight attendants continued treating her with the highest respect, checking on her more than anyone else, offering blankets, adjusting the lighting, and speaking softly as if she were someone delicate and important. She looked around the elegant first-class cabin, still trying to understand how a simple trip had turned into something so dramatic. The other passengers watched her with curiosity, not hostility, trying to guess who she was and why the staff were treating her like a VIP. One woman leaned toward her and whispered that she must be someone famous. The woman smiled shyly and shook her head, saying she was just traveling like everyone else. But even as she said it, she knew that was no longer how the world saw her. As the plane lifted into the sky, she stared out the window, the clouds glowing soft and white beneath the sunlight, but her mind stayed on the airport, replaying the humiliation again and again. It surprised her how deeply the words had cut. Even now, while surrounded by comfort, warmth, and respect, she tried to shake it off, reminding herself that her husband had handled everything, that justice had been served, that she was safe. Then the flight attendant returned with a tablet and explained that the captain wished to speak with her privately after takeoff. The woman felt her heart flutter with confusion. Why would the captain want to speak to her? The attendant explained that the airline had issued a formal directive regarding her treatment. The woman nodded politely, not knowing what to think. A few minutes later, the captain himself stepped out of the cockpit, something that rarely happened. He approached her seat and bowed his head slightly. His voice was steady but filled with sincerity as he apologized on behalf of the entire airline. He said he had been informed of her experience and assured her that such behavior would not be tolerated again. The woman felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude, discomfort, and disbelief all at once. She thanked him quietly, saying she only wanted kindness and fairness. The captain nodded and returned to his post, leaving the other passengers stunned. Some looked at her with admiration now, some with awe, some with quiet respect. No one looked down on her anymore after a while. The woman closed her eyes and tried to rest, but her thoughts kept returning to her husband. She wondered how he felt when he heard her voice shake with embarrassment. She wondered how he had stayed so calm while taking action so powerful that it reached across the entire airport. She remembered how gentle he always was, how he never boasted about money, how he lived with quiet simplicity. She loved him not because he was wealthy, but because he treated her with dignity long before anyone else did. As the flight continued, the woman noticed one of the attendants whispering to another and Then approaching her with hesitation, the attendant leaned down and explained that the airline headquarters had just sent an update. The staff responsible for humiliating her had been terminated immediately, not just suspended. The woman gasped softly, not out of satisfaction, but out of shock. She never wanted such a harsh outcome, she only wanted respect. She felt something twist inside her chest, a sadness for the lives affected, even if they had been cruel to her. She asked if there was a way to lessen the punishment, but the attendant explained gently that the decision was already finalized. The airline wanted to protect its relationship with her husband, and more importantly, avoid public scandal. The woman sat quietly, feeling the weight of the situation settle deeper. She thought about those workers going home without jobs, explaining to their families, facing uncertainty. A part of her felt vindicated, but another part felt heavy with sympathy. Meanwhile, unknown to her, news articles were already spreading online. Travelers were posting videos describing the scene. A headline began circulating, calling her the mystery woman who changed an airport with one phone call. Comment sections buzzed with theories. Some thought she was a secret princess. Others thought she owned the airline. Some said she was a government official. None imagined she was simply a humble woman loved deeply by a powerful man. As the plane began its descent toward her destination city, the woman looked out at the clouds again. This time she felt stronger. She felt seen, valued, protected. But she also felt changed. She realized how quickly people judged, how quickly power shifted, how fragile dignity could feel when denied. She also knew her husband would be waiting for her, and the moment she saw him again, the world would finally make sense. The plane landed smoothly, and as she prepared to exit, a message arrived on her phone from her husband. Only 5 simple words: I am proud of you, love. Those words filled her heart more than any apology, any luxury, any consequence ever could, and she stepped off the plane with her head held a little higher, ready for what awaited next, knowing the story was still not over, because lessons that big never end quietly. She stepped into the terminal of the new city, her steps slow and thoughtful. The air smelled different, the lights felt softer, and the voices around her blended into a gentle hum instead of sharp judgment. She held her small handbag close, not out of fear anymore, but out of habit formed during the stressful morning. As she walked forward, she saw people waiting for their loved ones, some holding flowers, some waving signs, some cheering with joy. For a moment she felt a small ache in her heart, wondering if anyone there ever felt the way she had at the airport earlier, wondering how many people had been judged by appearance, wondering how many stayed silent because they had no one to call. Then she saw him, her husband, standing calmly near the end of the hall. He wore simple clothes as always, a plain shirt and modest jacket. He did not look like a billionaire, but his presence felt steady and strong. The moment he saw her, his expression softened, his eyes warm with relief. She walked toward him slowly, and when she reached him, he touched her cheek gently and asked if she was all right. She nodded, but her eyes glistened, not with fear, but with emotion she held tightly for hours. He wrapped an arm around her protectively, guiding her away from the crowd. People around them glanced, noticing the tenderness in the gesture, not knowing the story behind it. They walked together toward the exit, and she told him everything in a soft voice, how the staff mocked her, how people stared, how she felt small and powerless. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening slightly, but his hand never letting go of hers. When she finished speaking, he told her again that she deserved respect everywhere, that no one had the right to treat her as less, that wealth should never be a requirement for dignity. As they reached the car, a sleek but modest vehicle, he opened the door for her, just like he always did, not because of status but because of love. Once they were seated, he told her something she did not expect. The airline board demanded a full review. New policies were being written. Mandatory training on respect and professional conduct was now underway, not because of anger, but because her experience revealed how easily prejudice could hide behind procedure. The woman listened quietly, stunned. She never imagined her quiet suffering would create change beyond herself. She looked at her husband and whispered that she never wanted anyone to feel afraid of losing their job. He nodded gently and said the world needed accountability, but also compassion. He told her he would request that the consequences focus on retraining and reform instead of punishment alone. Her heart felt lighter. The city lights passed by outside the window as they drove, painting soft reflections across the dashboard. She leaned back and breathed slowly, letting the comfort of his presence wash away the last traces of humiliation. When they arrived home, the house was peaceful, warm, familiar. The smell of fresh flowers greeted her, and a simple dinner waited on the table. He had prepared her favorite meal, not knowing how the day would unfold, but wanting her to feel cherished the moment she arrived. She sat down and felt tears form, not from sadness, but from gratitude. He sat across from her, watching her with gentle eyes. She told him she felt changed, that the experience opened her eyes to how quickly people judge appearances. He agreed and said the world often forgot that kindness costs nothing. After dinner they sat on the balcony, watching the evening sky turn shades of gold and rose. Birds settled into trees, cars passed below, and life seemed calm again. The woman rested her head on his shoulder and whispered that she did not care about first class or luxury or influence, she only cared about being seen as human. He kissed her forehead softly and told her she was more than that, she was the heart of his life. She smiled, feeling peace return to her bones. She thought back to the passengers who stared, the workers who mocked, the officials who panicked, and she realized something powerful. Respect was not something money could buy, it was something people deserved simply because they existed. As the sky darkened, the woman closed her eyes, knowing tomorrow the world might talk about her story, knowing strangers might argue about who she was, knowing rumors might spread, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that she found her voice, her dignity, and her strength, not through power but through grace, and in that quiet moment, wrapped in love and twilight air, she knew the lesson was bigger than the humiliation, bigger than the punishment, bigger than the airport. It was a reminder to everyone who ever felt small, that worth does not wear a label, a brand, or a price. It lives quietly inside, waiting to be seen, respected, and never denied again. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains and touched her face gently. She opened her eyes slowly, feeling rested for the first time since the airport incident. For a moment she lay still, listening to the soft quiet of the house, the distant sound of birds, the peaceful rhythm of a normal day. It felt strange that the world outside was buzzing with her story while inside everything felt calm and ordinary. She sat up and stretched, trying to shake off the last shadows of yesterday. Her husband was already awake, making tea in the kitchen. When she joined him, he smiled warmly and asked how she slept. She said she slept well, but her mind still drifted back to the humiliation she experienced. He nodded, understanding without needing words. They sat together in silence for a moment, drinking tea slowly, letting the warmth settle inside them. Then his phone buzzed. He checked it briefly and told her that news channels were covering what happened, not with her name but with the story of an ordinary woman who exposed deep prejudice in customer service culture. She felt her stomach flutter. She never wanted attention, never wanted fame, never wanted to be a headline. She only wanted fairness, respect, and a quiet life. Her husband told her she did not need to worry. No one knew her identity, and he intended to keep it that way. The airline had issued a public apology, announcing new training programs about dignity, equality, and professional conduct. They admitted their failure without mentioning her name, and that made her feel relieved. Later that day, they went out for a walk in a nearby park. The wind was cool, the trees moved gently, families laughed, joggers passed by. Life felt normal again. A little girl tripped nearby and fell. The woman rushed forward instinctively, helping her up and wiping dirt from her knee. The child's mother thanked her warmly, smiling with genuine appreciation. That small act of kindness felt like healing. It reminded her that the world still held goodness. Not everyone judged, not everyone mocked, not everyone was blind to humanity. As they continued walking, she thought about the workers who had been fired. She felt a tug of sympathy. She asked her husband again if there was a way to soften their punishment. He told her he had already made a request for reconsideration. The company would offer them a chance to attend training and return to work if they accepted responsibility and learned from their actions. The woman breathed out slowly, relief warming her chest. She never wanted revenge, just change, and now change was happening without cruelty. That evening they sat together on the sofa, watching the sunset through the window. The sky glowed with soft orange and pink, and the world outside looked gentle. Her husband rested his hand over hers and told her something she did not expect. People all over the internet were discussing how judging someone by appearance can lead to terrible mistakes. Many shared their own experiences, moments when they were treated poorly because they looked ordinary, poor, different, quiet, or simple. Her story had become a mirror that showed society something it often ignored. She felt humbled. She never imagined her quiet pain could inspire reflection in others. She looked at her husband and whispered that she was not special. He shook his head and said she was special because she never let anger swallow her, never let power corrupt her, never let humiliation erase her gentleness. His words brought tears to her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. Later, as night settled, she stood on the balcony and looked up at the stars. She thought about the airport, the whispers, the stares, the accusations, the fear. She also thought about the apology, the reforms, the compassion, and the quiet strength she found inside herself. She realized something important. Dignity was not given by others, it was carried within, waiting to be defended. When necessary, she closed her eyes and made a promise to herself. She would never again shrink to make others comfortable, never again doubt her worth because of clothes, appearance, or status. She would walk through the world with quiet confidence, knowing who she was even if others could not see it. Inside the house, her husband called to her softly. She turned, smiling, letting the night air fade behind her, and as she stepped inside, she carried with her the final truth of her journey. Respect should never depend on wealth, appearance, or status. It should be given freely because every person, no matter how ordinary, holds a story, a heart, and a dignity that deserves to be seen, honored, and never denied again.